Witch of Blackbird Pond by Elizabeth George Spear, chapter 11. Midsummer heat lay heavily upon the Connecticut Valley. The bare feet of the children were covered with fine, dry dust from the road. Inside the kitchen, the small bodies squirmed on the hard benches, and eyes strayed from the primers to gaze through the door at the forbidden sunshine. Kit felt as restless as her pupils. If only I could be like Mercy, Kit thought. When her own voice rose in exasperation, she was ashamed, remembering Mercy's unfailing patience. Watching Mercy this morning, she thought again, soberly, of the words that Mercy had spoken earlier in the summer. There had been a rare afternoon when Judith had invited Kit to go with some of the other girls of the town to pick flowers and picnic along the shore of the river. At the last moment, Kit had turned back to Mercy and cried impulsively, "Oh, if only you could go too, Mercy. How can you bear it, always staying behind?" And Mercy had answered serenely, "Oh, I settled that a long time ago. I remember it very well. Father had carried me to the doorstep, and I sat there watching the children playing a game in the road. I thought of all the things I would never be able to do. And then I thought about the things that I could do. Since then, I've just never thought much about it." Teaching the children was certainly something that Mercy could do, with love and skill. And yet, Kit often wondered, what was it worth? All this work to master their letters. She herself had been eager to learn, scarcely able to wait to open the wonderful volumes in Grandfather's library. But most of these children would never even imagine the adventures that words could mean. Here in New England, books contained only a dreary collection of sermons, or at most some pious religious poetry. Sighing, Kit glanced over the docilely bent heads of her charges toward the open doorway, and as she did so, a sudden motion caught her attention. She moved quickly. "I'm sure someone is out there again," she thought. "Today I'm going to find out." Yes, for the third time, a little bunch of flowers, buttercups and wild geraniums, lay on the doorstep. As she bent to pick them up, she was certain that a shadowy figure slipped behind a tree. Curiosity made her forget her pupils, and stepping into the road, she saw the small figure plainly and recognized Prudence Cruff. "Prudence," she called, "don't run away. Is it you who left the flowers?" The child came slowly from behind the tree. She was thinner than ever, clad in a shapeless, sack-like affair tied about her middle. Her eyes, much too big for her pinched little face, gazed at Kit with longing. She reminded Kit of a young fawn that had wandered near the house one morning. It had drawn nearer just like this, quivering with eagerness at the food Mercy set out, yet tensed to spring at the slightest warning. "Who are the flowers for, Prudence?" "You." The child's voice was nothing but a hoarse whisper. "Thank you. They're lovely. But why don't you come into the school with the others?" I'm too big," stammered Prudence. "You mean you know how to read already?" "No. Pa wanted me to go to school, but Ma says I'm too stupid." "You don't really believe that, do you, Prudence?" A bare toe dug into the dirt of the roadway. "I don't know. I can hear you when the door is open. I bet I could learn as good as them." "Of course you could, and you ought to. Why don't you come in with me right now and see how easy it is?" Prudence shook her head violently. "Somebody'd tell on me." "What if they did?" "Ma'd cane me. I'm not supposed to speak to you." Remembering Goodwife Cruff's hard, thin mouth, Kit did not urge. "Prudence," she suggested instead, "you could learn to read by yourself if you really wanted to." "I haven't any horn." Kit remembered something. "Is there a place where you could meet me, where no one would tell on you?" she asked. Can you get to the meadows? Prudence nodded. Nobody cares where I go, just so's I get the work done, she said. Then if you'll try to meet me there this afternoon, I'll bring you a hornbook, and I'll teach you to read some of it. Will you come? If I get finished, Prudence breathed. You know the path that leads from South Road over to Blackbird Pond? Prudence gulped. The witch lives down there. Don't be silly. She's a gentle old woman who wouldn't harm a field mouse. Anyway, you don't need to go that far. There's a big willow tree just down the path. I'll wait for you there. Will you try? The struggle behind those round eyes hurt to watch. Maybe, whispered Prudence, and then she turned and ran. Kit walked slowly back into the schoolroom. What excuse could she make to get into her trunks today? At the bottom of one of them, she had remembered, was a little hornbook. It had been a present brought from England by friends of her grandfather's. It was backed by silver filigree, underlaid with red satin, and it had a small silver handle. She had never really used it. She remembered how she had astonished the visitors by reading every letter straight off, but she had cherished the gift for its delicate craftsmanship. What a pity every child couldn't learn to read under a willow tree, Kit thought a week later. She and Prudence sat on a cool, grassy carpet. A pale green curtain of branches just brushed the grasses and threw a filigree of shadows, as delicate as the wrought silver, on the child's face. This was the third lesson. At first, Prudence had been speechless. In all her short life, the child had seldom seen, and certainly never held in her hands, anything so lovely as the exquisite little silver hornbook. For long moments she had been too dazed to realize that the tiny alphabet fastened to it was made up of the same A's and B's and AB's that she had overheard through the school doorway. But now, by this third meeting, she was drinking in the precious letters so speedily that Kit knew she must soon find a primer as well. "'Tis getting late, Prudence. I don't want you to get in trouble, and I must go back too." The child sighed and held out the hornbook obediently. "That is yours, Prudence. I meant it for a present for you." "She never let me have it," the girl said regretfully. "You'll have to keep it for me." Kit made a decision. She had been wanting an excuse to take Prudence to Hannah. She had a feeling that the child needed that comforting refuge even more than she did herself. "I know what we'll do," she suggested. "We'll leave the book here with Hannah. Then, anytime you want to use it, you can come and get it from her." Terror blanched the child's face. "Prudence, listen to me. You're afraid of Hannah because you don't know her, and because you've heard things that just aren't true. She'll cut off my nose if I go near her." Kit laughed, then took the child's hands in her own and spoke as earnestly as she knew how. "You trust me, don't you?" The small head nodded solemnly. "Then come with me and see for yourself. I promise you, on my honor, nothing will hurt you." The bony hand in hers was trembling as they walked down the grassy path, but Prudence stepped resolutely beside her. Kit's heart ached suddenly with a pity and gratitude at such trust. "I've brought another rebel to visit you," she announced as Hannah came to the door. Hannah's pale eyes twinkled. "What a wonderful day," she exclaimed. "4 new kittens and now visitors. Come and see." Under a corner of the cabin, on a pile of soft grass, the great yellow cat curled protectively around 4 tiny balls of fluff. Her topaz eyes glowed up at them, and her purr was boastful. Completely disarmed, Prudence went down on her knees. "Oh, the dear little things," she whispered, reaching one reverent finger. 2 black ones, and 1 striped, and 1 yellow one." Over her head, Kit and Hannah smiled. If thee is very, very careful, thee can pick one up and hold it, Hannah told her. With a black kitten cradled in her hands, Prudence watched them find a safe corner for the hornbook. Thee is welcome any time, child. I'll keep it safe for thee. Now, show me what thee has learned today. What letter is this? In the clean white sand on the floor, Hannah traced a careful B. Looking at Prudence, Kit held her breath. But there was no trace of fear in those fawn-like eyes as Hannah held out the stick. Boldly, Prudence reached to take it in her own hand, and carefully and proudly she traced the lines herself. I believe there must be a morsel of blueberry cake for such a smart pupil, praised Hannah. The morsel of cake vanished in a twinkling. Hannah's magic cure for every ill, Nat had said. Blueberry cake and a kitten. Kit smiled to see it working its charm on Prudence, but there was an invisible ingredient that made the cure unfailing. The Bible name for it was love. Why do they say she's a witch? Prudence demanded, as the two walked slowly back along the path. Because they have never tried to get to know her. People are afraid of things they don't understand. You won't be afraid of her now, will you? You will go to see her when you can, even if I'm not there? The child considered. Yes, she said finally. I'm going back the first chance I get. Not just because the horn is there. I think Hannah is lonesome. Of course, she has the cat to talk to, but don't you think sometimes she must want somebody to answer back? Watching Prudence scurry off toward home, Kit had a moment's misgiving. As always, she had acted on impulse, never stopping to weigh the consequences. Now, too late, she began to wonder. Had it been fair to draw Prudence into her secret world? She felt completely justified in deceiving her aunt and uncle. They were narrow-minded and mistaken, but the thought of Goodwife Cruff made her shudder. Yet Prudence had looked so miserable. She needed a friend. For a few hours, those wary, anxious eyes had been filled with shining trust and happiness. Wasn't that worth a little risk? Kit shook off her qualms and set her own face towards home, and another dull evening. William could talk of nothing but his house these days. Every evening he must report exactly which trees had been cut, which boards fashioned. Today, he reported, as the family moved inside to escape the twilight mist that rose from the river, he had overseen the carpenter who was splitting the white oak for the clapboards. I don't think I made any mistake in deciding on riven oak, he told them. Of course, 2 shillings a day is high for a carpenter, but... Sometimes Kit wanted to stop her ears. Would she have to hear the price of every nail that went into those boards, and every single nail the finest that money could buy? She was tired of the house already before the first board was in place. Judith, however, took a lively interest in such details. She had a flair for line and form and a definite mind of her own, and it was plain, to Kit at least, that as William planned his house, Judith was comparing it timber for timber with the house she dreamed for herself. Her purpose was only too apparent as she made adroit attempts to draw John Holbrook into the discussion. I think you should have one of those new roofs, William, she said now. Gambrel, they call them, like the new house on the road to Hartford. I think they look so distinguished. Don't you, John? Mercy laughed at John's bewilderment. I don't believe John even notices there's a roof over his head, she teased gently, unless the rain happens to leak through onto his nose. And then he'd just pick up his book and move somewhere else, added Kit. William did not smile. He was considering the matter gravely. Perhaps you're right, Judith. When I ride down Hartford Way tomorrow, I'll take a good look at that house. Of course, you never know whether to risk a new style like that. Oh, for heaven's sake. Kit gave her yarn an impatient jerk. that sent the ball bouncing across the floor. Too tardily, William bent to catch it and had to get heavily down on his knees to retrieve it from under the settle. Now some men, Kit reflected, could pick up a ball of yarn without looking ridiculous. She thanked him with little grace. It was Mercy, as usual, who quietly steered them into untroubled water. "What did you bring to read us tonight, John?" she inquired. "Judith, light a pine knot for him to see by." In this one thing, they were all united. John loved to read out loud, and they were equally happy to listen. For all of them, the days were filled with hard labor, with little enough to satisfy the hunger of their minds and spirits. The books that John shared with them had opened a window on a larger world. Perhaps each of them, listening, glimpsed through that window a private world, unknown to the others. Matthew Wood sat scowling, his keen mind challenging and weighing each new thought. Rachel, Kit suspected, welcomed the peace and relaxation of those moments as much as the reading itself. What William thought, it was impossible to discern. Kit often wished that John would read something besides the religious tracts he so admired, but even for her impatient spirits, the beauty of his voice wove a magic spell. Tonight, it was poetry. "These were written by a woman in Boston," he explained. "Anne Bradstreet, wife of a governor of Massachusetts. Dr. Bulkley feels they are worthy to be compared with the finest poetry of England. This is what she writes about the sun. Art thou so full of glory that no eye hath strength, thy shining rays once to behold? And is thy splendid throne erect so high, as to approach it can no earthly mold? How full of glory then must thy Creator be, who gave this bright light luster unto thee, admired, adored forever, be thy majesty." Kit's needles moved more slowly. Her jangling nerves relaxed, and as the clear, low voice went on, a contentment wrapped round her like the sunshine in the meadow. "John is a part of the family already," she reflected. "We have all come to love him. Yet I still feel an awe of him a little. Uncle Matthew thinks he is weak, but I suspect that underneath they are both made of the same New England rock. For John, everything in his life, even the girl he marries, will always be second to his work. Does Judith realize that, I wonder? Or does she think she can change him?" Suddenly, perhaps because the poetry had opened her heart, Kit raised her eyes and made a discovery. Mercy sat, as usual, slightly in the shadow beside the hearth, her needles moving so automatically that she rarely glanced at her work. Now, a brightly glowing bead of resin threw a brief light across her face. Those great listening eyes were fastened on the face of the young man bent over his book, and for one instant Mercy's whole heart was revealed. Mercy was in love with John Holbrook. Faster than thought, the shadows claimed Mercy again. Kit glanced hastily around the circle. No one else had noticed. Judith sat dreaming, a little secret smile on her lips. Rachel nodded drowsily, too tired to keep her mind on the reading. Matthew sat intent, ready to pounce on a hint of heresy. "I must have imagined it," thought Kit, yet her hands were shaking. Mercy and John Holbrook. How right! How incredibly, utterly right! And how impossible! I wish I had not seen it, she thought in a burst of sadness. Yet she knew she would never forget as long as she lived. The flame that had burned in Mercy's eyes had such purity, such complete selflessness, that everything Kit had ever known seemed dim in its light. What must it be to care for someone like